If your yes has become automatic, your no has probably gone missing. That is where boundaries begins. Not with a dramatic villain, not with one obvious crisis. It begins with an ordinary life that looks responsible from the outside and quietly exhausting from the inside. A person can be praised for being helpful, spiritual, agreeable, available, and easy to work with, while slowly losing the ability to tell where her own life ends and everyone else's life begins. Welcome to this summary of boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. In this first episode, we're going to build the foundation of the book. What a boundary is, why the authors think boundary problems create so much hidden pain, and why saying no is not the opposite of love. The book opens with Sherry, a working mother whose day is almost comically crowded. She wakes up tired. Her children need her. Her husband complains. Her mother pressures her through guilt. Work expects her to absorb extra responsibility. Friends and church obligations pull at her. By the end of the day, she has said yes in every direction, but the yes have not created love, peace, or freedom. They have created resentment. That opening is important because the authors do not treat boundaries as a cold personality trick. They treat them as a way to tell the truth about responsibility. Sherry is not selfish because she is tired. She is tired because she has been living as if every need, every emotion, every crisis, and every expectation around her belongs to her. The central image is simple. A boundary is a property line. A physical fence tells you where 1 yard ends and another begins. It does not say that neighbors should hate each other. It says each owner is responsible for what happens on his or her own property. Boundaries work the same way in the human soul. They mark what is mine to own, mine to protect, mine to develop, and mine to offer freely. Cloud and Townsend keep returning to one question. What are you responsible for, and what are you not responsible for? They argue that we are responsible for our feelings, attitudes, behaviors, choices, limits, talents, thoughts, desires, values, and love. Other people may influence these things, but they do not own them for us, and we cannot own those things for them. That distinction sounds obvious until real life starts talking. Your mother says she is lonely. Your friend says you're the only one who understands. Your boss says the deadline is impossible unless you work another night. Your child explodes because a consequence finally arrived. Your spouse sulks because you disagreed. Suddenly, the property line disappears, and you feel responsible not only to care, but to fix the emotional weather in every room. The book says love requires responsibility, but responsibility has borders. There is a difference between helping someone carry a burden and taking over a load that belongs to them. A burden may be a crisis too heavy for one person to carry alone. A load is the daily responsibility of a person's own life. Healthy love helps with burdens. Unhealthy rescuing steals the other person's load and then complains about the weight. This is why boundaries are not walls. A wall keeps everything out. A boundary has a gate. It lets good things in and bad things out. It allows love to move freely because love is no longer being confused with pressure, guilt, panic, or fear. The authors describe several boundary materials. The first is skin. Your body is a boundary. It shows that your physical self is yours, and it must be protected from harm. The second is words, especially the word no. No is one of the most basic boundary words because it tells the truth about limits. Another boundary is truth. Reality itself is a boundary. When someone denies the consequences of their behavior, truth pushes back. Geography can also be a boundary. Sometimes the healthiest thing is to remove yourself from a destructive setting. Time can be a boundary. Emotional distance can be a boundary. Other people can help form boundaries when you need support. Consequences are boundaries because they connect choices with reality. Notice how practical this is. The book is not saying, become colder. It is saying, stop pretending that love can survive without truth. If a person repeatedly hurts you and nothing changes, the problem is not that you lack compassion. The problem may be that compassion has been separated from limits. The authors write from a Christian framework, so they connect boundaries with spiritual maturity. They argue that God himself respects boundaries. God gives people choices, allows consequences, speaks truth, and invites love rather than forcing it. In that view, boundaries are not rebellion against love. They are part of the structure that makes real love possible. That point matters because many people fear that boundaries are selfish. They imagine that a loving person should always be available, always agreeable, and always willing to absorb discomfort for someone else. Boundaries challenges that idea. If you say yes only because you are afraid, resentful, or guilty, the yes may look generous, but it is not free. The book also separates care from control. You can care about another person's pain. You can listen, encourage, help, forgive, and stay present. But you cannot make another adult become honest, responsible, grateful, sober, faithful, calm, or mature. When you try, you move from love into control, and control usually creates more chaos. So the first foundation is ownership. My feelings are mine. My choices are mine. My limits are mine. My yes is mine. My no is mine. And the same is true for you. This sounds simple, but it is the beginning of freedom because it tells us where work can actually happen. If Sherry's life is falling apart because she is trying to manage everyone else's disappointment, the solution is not to become uncaring. The solution is to recover the truth. She can love her mother without letting guilt run her evening. She can care about her child without rescuing him from every consequence. She can serve at work without becoming the emergency container for every poorly planned task. She can be kind without becoming available for unlimited use. The book's deeper claim is that boundaries protect love from resentment. When people cannot say no, their yes becomes polluted. They may still show up, but inside they are counting the cost, storing bitterness, and secretly hoping someone notices how much they are sacrificing. Boundaries bring the cost into the open. They make love honest. This does not make boundaries easy. The first no may feel like betrayal. The first limit may make other people angry. The first honest conversation may expose years of unspoken agreements. But Cloud and Townsend are clear. The pain of building boundaries is different from the pain of living without them. One pain leads toward maturity. The other repeats the same day over and over. By the end of this first movement, boundaries has given us a map. A human life is not an open field where everyone may wander in and take what they need. It is a garden with a gate. It needs protection. It needs cultivation. It needs truthful signs. And it needs the freedom to give from love, not from panic. Episode. A boundary is not a rejection of love. It is the place where love stops pretending and starts telling the truth. There is another reason the property line image matters. A property line does not tell you whether the owner is generous. It tells you who has the authority to decide. If I invite you into my yard, that can be hospitality. If you walk in and start digging because you decided my yard should serve your plan, that is not hospitality. Many boundary problems begin when people treat access as entitlement. This is why the book keeps returning to freedom. Love requires freedom because love has to be chosen. If a person is pressured, guilt, cornered, or threatened into giving, the act may still help someone, but it is not the same as free love. It is a transaction under emotional pressure. Boundaries give the person enough room to choose. The Sherry story works because no single request looks outrageous by itself. A child needs help. A mother wants attention. A boss wants more work. A friend needs support. A spouse has expectations. A church has a need. If any one of those appeared alone, it might be manageable. The disaster comes from a life with no working gate. Everything enters. Nothing is sorted. The person is praised for availability while quietly losing agency. Cloud and Townsend also make a useful distinction between feelings and actions. Feelings are real, but they do not get to become dictators. If someone feels disappointed by your no, their feeling matters, but it does not automatically mean your no is wrong. If you feel afraid when setting a boundary, that fear matters, but it does not automatically mean you must withdraw the boundary. Another important boundary material is consequences. Consequences are not revenge. They are reality made visible. If a person repeatedly borrows money and never repays it, a boundary may be, I will not lend more money. That consequence is not hatred. It is the end of pretending that the pattern is harmless. Without consequences, words often become decorative. The author's language about being responsible to others but not for others is one of the most practical tools in the book. Responsible to means I can love, tell truth, show mercy, offer help, and remain humanly present. Responsible for means I become the engine of your choices. The first is love. The second eventually becomes control, resentment, or burnout. This also explains why some very caring people become secretly angry. They are doing loving-looking things from a place of compulsion. They are giving time they have not freely chosen to give. They are carrying pain that does not belong to them. They are protecting others from reality and then wondering why no one grows. Boundaries do not remove care. They remove confusion. It helps to imagine a boundary as a sentence with both kindness and clarity. I care about you, and I cannot do that tonight. I want this relationship, and I will not continue this conversation while insults are happening. I am willing to help for 1 hour, and after that I need to leave. The end matters. It keeps love and limit in the same breath. The book does not pretend every boundary will be understood. Some people will misread limits because the old arrangement benefited them. Others will be hurt because they are not used to hearing no. Some will test whether the gate is real. This is why a boundary is not just a sentence. It is a sentence plus follow-through. For this first episode, the practical question is simple. Where have you confused love with having no property line? Not where have you been mildly inconvenienced. Not where do you wish no one ever needed you. The deeper question is where your yes has stopped being free, truthful, and loving. That is usually where the boundary work begins. The strange thing about boundary problems is that they often wear the costume of virtue. The compliant person looks kind. The avoidant person looks independent. The controller looks strong. The non-responsive person looks calm. But Cloud and Townsend want us to look under the costume and ask what is really happening with responsibility, love, fear, and truth. Boundaries. In this episode, we cover the book's diagnosis, the common boundary problems, how they develop, the 10 laws of boundaries, and the myths that make people afraid to change. The first boundary problem is compliance. Compliant people say yes when they need to say no. They adapt to the needs, moods, demands, or expectations of others so quickly that they lose contact with themselves. They're not always consciously lying. Many have trained themselves not to notice their own limits until resentment, exhaustion, or anxiety tells the truth for them. The compliant person may fear anger. They may fear abandonment. They may fear being seen as selfish. They may have learned that disagreement is dangerous. So they become experts at reading the room. The problem is that a life built around avoiding disapproval cannot become a free life. The second problem is avoidance. Avoidants have trouble saying yes to help, support, comfort, or emotional need. They may have strong walls but weak gates. When they are hurt, they disappear. When they need care, they minimize it. When someone offers love, they distrust it or feel ashamed of needing it. Compliance and avoidance can combine in painful ways. A person may say yes to everyone else's needs and no to their own. That creates a soul that is open in the wrong direction and closed in the wrong direction. Everyone can come in, but nothing nourishing is allowed to enter. The third problem is control. Controllers do not respect other people's no. Some controllers are aggressive. They push, threaten, argue, shame, or overpower. Others are manipulative. They use guilt, charm, helplessness, crisis, or spiritual language to get their way. The style differs, but the issue is the same. The other person's boundary is treated as an obstacle to defeat. The fourth problem is non-responsiveness. Non-responsive people do not hear the real needs of others. They may be self-absorbed, disconnected, or harshly independent. Boundaries are not an excuse for this. The book is careful here. A healthy boundary does not mean your pain is irrelevant. It means I can love you without taking ownership of what only you can own. Cloud and Townsend then ask where these patterns come from. They point to development. Children learn boundaries gradually. They need attachment, safety, separateness, practice, correction, and love that survives disagreement. A child who is allowed to say no in age-appropriate ways learns that separateness is not the end of relationship. But if a family punishes independence, mocks limits, rewards compliance, ignores pain, or rescues children from all consequences, boundary development can be distorted. Some children learn that love means disappearing. Some learn that power means control. Some learn that need is shameful. Some never learn that actions have consequences. The book's developmental picture is not about blaming parents forever. It is about understanding why adult change can feel so emotionally expensive. If saying no once brought rage, withdrawal, punishment, or rejection, then a simple adult limit may feel like walking back into an old storm. Then come the 10 laws of boundaries. These laws are the book's attempt to describe how relationships and responsibility actually work. The law of sowing and reaping says choices produce consequences. If someone is protected from the harvest of their behavior, they may never learn. Rescuing can interrupt reality, and reality is often the teacher a person most needs. The law of responsibility says we are responsible to one another, but not for one another. We are responsible to love, tell truth, encourage, forgive, and help. We are not responsible to become the other person's conscience, willpower, or emotional engine. The law of power says we have power over some things and not others. We do not have power to make another person change. We do have power to confess, choose, ask for help, set limits, and change our own participation in a destructive pattern. The law of respect says we must respect the boundaries of others if we want our boundaries respected. This is where the book refuses hypocrisy. You cannot demand freedom for your no while punishing someone else's no. The law of motivation asks why we give. Love, freedom, gratitude, and values create one kind of giving. Fear, guilt, payback, approval, hunger, and shame create another. The action may look the same from the outside, but the soul underneath is different. The law of evaluation says boundaries may cause pain, but pain is not always harm. A dentist may cause pain while healing a tooth. A limit may disappoint someone while helping the relationship become more truthful. The question is not, did anyone feel discomfort? The question is, what kind of fruit will this produce? The law of proactivity says wounded people often move from helplessness to reactive anger before they learn mature freedom. Anger can reveal a violated boundary, but it cannot be the final home. The goal is not revenge. The goal is active, values-based choice. The law of envy says envy keeps us focused outside our property line. Instead of developing what is ours, we stare at what someone else has. Boundaries pull attention back to our own choices, work, grief, and growth. The law of activity says growth requires movement. Passive waiting rarely builds boundaries. People must practice ask, risk, speak, and try. The law of exposure says boundaries must become visible. A hidden no is not a boundary that others can respond to. Secret resentment does not teach anyone the property line. Boundaries need words, actions, and clarity. After the laws come the myths. These are the beliefs that make boundaries feel morally dangerous. The first myth is that boundaries are selfish. The book answers that selfishness is not the same as stewardship. Caring for your life is not the opposite of loving others. It is often what makes love sustainable. Another myth says boundaries are a sign of disobedience or lack of spirituality. But the authors argue that mature faith includes truth, freedom, responsibility, and consequences. Forced goodness is not the same as love. Another myth says if I set boundaries, I will hurt others. The book answers, you may disappoint them, but disappointment is not always damage. Sometimes the discomfort of a boundary is exactly what reveals an unhealthy dependency. Another myth says boundaries mean anger. In reality, anger is often a signal that a boundary has been crossed, but a mature boundary does not have to be delivered with rage. Calm clarity can be stronger than an emotional explosion. Another myth says boundaries will make people leave. Sometimes they might. That is the frightening part. But the book presses the question, if a relationship survives only when you have no limits, what kind of relationship is it? What makes this episode so important is that the book moves boundaries out of mood and into principle. Boundaries are not just something you feel when you're tired. They're not a personality preference for assertive people. They are laws of love, responsibility, and reality. Close. When no feels dangerous, the goal is not to become hard. The goal is to become honest enough that love can stop depending on fear. The 4 boundary problems are also useful because they show that boundary failure is not one personality type. Some people fail by being too open. Some fail by being too closed. Some fail by pushing through other people's limits. Some fail by refusing to respond to legitimate need. The goal is not to become a tougher version of your current imbalance. The goal is mature love with a working gait. Compliers often need permission to disappoint people. That sounds small, but it is not. If a person grew up believing disappointment equals danger, then every no feels morally loaded. The authors want the compliant person to learn that another person's disappointment may be sad, but it is survivable. It may even be necessary. Avoidants often need permission to need. They may be proud of not asking for anything, but the book treats that as a boundary problem too. A gate that never opens is not maturity. It is isolation with good branding. Healthy people can receive comfort, correction, help, and love without treating need as humiliation. Controllers need to experience the reality that other people are separate. This is hard for aggressive controllers because they're used to winning through force. It is also hard for manipulative controllers because they're used to winning through emotional fog. A real boundary gives both types the same message. You may choose your behavior, but you may not own my yes. Non-responsive people need to learn that boundaries are not a spiritual-sounding excuse for indifference. If someone says, your needs are your problem, and uses boundaries to avoid love, they have missed the point. Boundaries define responsibility so love can become more accurate, not so compassion can be deleted. The developmental chapters also explain why boundary work may feel younger than the person doing it. An adult may intellectually know they can say no, while emotionally feeling like a child about to be punished. That does not mean the adult is foolish. It means the nervous system remembers old lessons. Growth often requires new experiences strong enough to challenge old fear. The 10 laws give structure to that growth. The law of sowing and reaping is especially uncomfortable because many families and workplaces are built around interrupting the harvest. The irresponsible person sows chaos, and the responsible person reaps stress. Boundaries return the harvest to the field where it was planted. The law of power protects people from wasting years on impossible assignments. You cannot repent for someone else. You cannot mature for someone else. You cannot want sobriety, honesty, discipline, or faithfulness for someone else strongly enough to make it happen. You can choose your own truth, help, limits, and consequences. The law of respect is the safeguard against hypocrisy. Some people learn boundaries and become skilled at protecting themselves while remaining offended by everyone else's limits. That is not boundary maturity. It is self-protection without mutuality. Respect says the same freedom I need is also freedom I must grant. The myths matter because fear often disguises itself as virtue. I'm not setting a boundary because I am loving. Maybe, or maybe I'm terrified. I'm not saying no because I am loyal. Maybe, or maybe I'm avoiding conflict. I am not letting consequences happen because I am merciful. Maybe, or maybe I am controlling the outcome so I do not have to feel anxious. The book's challenge is to examine motive without becoming cruel to yourself. Many boundaryless patterns began as survival. They help someone stay connected, avoid rage, or win approval. The point is not shame. The point is to notice that an old survival strategy may be damaging adult love. Boundaries are easiest to admire in theory and hardest to practice at the dinner table. It is one thing to say, I am responsible for my choices. It is another thing to say to a parent who knows exactly which guilt button was installed in childhood. It is one thing to respect another person's no. It is another thing to hear no from a spouse and not treat it as rejection. This is where boundaries becomes painfully concrete. Boundaries. In this episode, we cover the relationship conflicts in the middle of the book: family, friends, and marriage. The family chapter begins with a simple observation. Many adults leave home physically long before they leave emotionally. They may have their own house, spouse, children, job, and bank account, yet still live as if the original family system owns their choices. A parent's disappointment can feel like a command. A sibling's crisis can override every plan. A holiday can become a hostage negotiation with food. Cloud and Townsend do not tell readers to despise family. They argue the opposite. Family relationships matter deeply. But love for family becomes distorted when adulthood never becomes adulthood. If an adult child cannot choose without panic, guilt, or emotional punishment, the family boundary is still confused. One common pattern is the guilt message. A parent may not directly say, "You must do what I want." Instead, the message is wrapped in sadness, sacrifice, illness, loneliness, or spiritual concern. The adult child is trained to feel responsible for the parent's emotional state. The book's response is blunt in principle. Compassion is good, but another adult's feelings are not your master. Another pattern is triangulation. Instead of speaking directly to the person involved, family members pull in a third person. A mother complains to one child about another. A sibling recruits allies. A spouse uses the extended family to pressure the partner. Triangles avoid direct responsibility. Boundaries require people to carry their own messages to the proper person. The authors also describe old boundary injuries. If a family punished separateness, adulthood may require grief. You may have to accept that some relatives prefer the old version of you because the old version was easier to control. That does not make them monsters. It does mean growth may disturb the family balance. Healthy family boundaries often begin with small acts of truth. I cannot come this weekend. I will not discuss that through someone else. I am willing to help with this amount of time or money, not unlimited time or money. I love you, and I will leave the conversation if it becomes insulting. These statements sound simple. In a guilt-trained soul, they can feel like a revolution. The friendship chapter shifts the focus. Friendship should be one of the freest places in life, but boundary problems can quietly turn friendship into obligation, rescue, or avoidance. The book describes different friendship patterns. One is the compliant friendship, where both people are nice, neither says what they want, and both secretly hope the other will guess. It sounds peaceful until resentment piles up under the politeness. Two people can be extremely considerate and still dishonest if neither will speak clearly. Another pattern is the compliant person with the aggressive controller. One friend gives in, the other pushes. The compliant friend feels used, but continues to participate. The controller may not even recognize the imbalance because the other person's yes has been so automatic. There is also the compliant person with the manipulative controller. Here the pressure is softer. The controlling friend may be charming, needy, wounded, or full of emergencies. The compliant friend feels cruel for saying no, so the pattern continues. Avoidant friendships have another problem. Two people may genuinely care about each other, but both hide need. They talk about events, work, jokes, and other people, but never bring their real hunger, fear, grief, or desire into the relationship. The friendship stays safe and shallow. Cloud and Townsend's vision of friendship is neither domination nor distance. A healthy friend can say yes freely, say no honestly, ask for help, receive help, and survive disappointment. Friendship grows when both people can tell the truth and remain connected. Then the book turns to marriage, where boundary confusion can become especially intense because two lives are joined so closely. The authors reject the idea that marriage means two people stop having separate ownership. Unity is not the same as fusion. A healthy marriage has togetherness and separateness. The key principle is that spouses cannot control each other into maturity. A husband cannot make his wife be emotionally open by nagging, withdrawing, or punishing. A wife cannot make her husband become responsible by rescuing him from every consequence and then resenting him. Each spouse has power over his or her own choices, words, limits, and participation. This is where many couples get stuck. One spouse says, "I set a boundary," but what they mean is, "I told the other person what they must do." Boundaries are not commands for someone else's property. A boundary says what I will do, what I will accept, what I will participate in, and what consequence I will choose if the pattern continues. For example, you cannot set a boundary that says, "You must stop yelling." That is a wish or request aimed at the other person's behavior. A boundary says, "I want to talk, but I will not stay in a conversation where I am being yelled at. I will pause and come back when we can speak respectfully." The difference is enormous. One tries to control the other governs the self. The book also warns against enabling in marriage. If one spouse repeatedly absorbs the consequences of the other's irresponsibility, the irresponsible pattern may deepen. Love does not mean preventing a spouse from ever experiencing the harvest of choices. Sometimes love tells the truth and lets reality arrive. But boundaries in marriage are not a license for coldness. Cloud and Townsend keep love and truth together. A spouse should not use boundaries to avoid vulnerability, punish weakness, or escape normal sacrifice. Marriage requires service, patience, forgiveness, and shared burdens. The boundary question is whether love is free and truthful or coerced and resentful. This episode brings the book's main idea into emotional territory. In families, boundaries help adults become adults. In friendship, boundaries make affection honest. In marriage, boundaries protect both unity and personhood. The same principle keeps appearing. I can love you better when I stop pretending I own your life or that you own mine. The people closest to you do not need a fake yes. They need a real person who can love with a clear heart and a truthful no. Family boundaries are difficult because families do not merely ask for actions. They carry history. A request from a parent may arrive with decades of memory attached. The adult child is not just deciding whether to visit. They are fighting the old fear of being bad, ungrateful, disloyal, or abandoned. That is why the book treats family boundaries as both practical and emotional. One of the strongest family principles is directness. If I have a problem with you, I need to speak with you, not recruit someone else to carry my anxiety. Triangulation feels easier because it avoids confrontation, but spreads confusion. Boundaries invite each person back to their own lane. Speak your own truth to the person involved. The book also warns that family systems often resist change because every role supports the old balance. The responsible one carries. The fragile one collapses. The angry one intimidates. The peacekeeper smooths everything over. When one person steps out of the role, everyone feels the shift. That does not automatically mean the change is wrong. It means the system noticed. Friendship boundaries are subtler because friendship is voluntary. People assume that if a friendship is hard, something is wrong with one person. Cloud and Townsend show that even good people can create unhealthy patterns when honesty is missing. A friendship where no one can say no is not kinder. It is less truthful. Healthy friendship includes the freedom to want different things. One friend may want more time than the other can give. One may need support the other is not equipped to provide alone. One may have a pattern of crisis that exhausts the other. Boundaries allow the friends to name reality before resentment poisons affection. Marriage boundaries require a special kind of courage because the relationship is so close. A spouse's sadness, anger, silence, or anxiety can feel impossible to tolerate. The boundary temptation is either to control the spouse or surrender the self. The book offers a third path. Own yourself clearly while remaining committed to love. This means consequences in marriage must be chosen carefully. They are not threats designed to dominate. They are truthful actions designed to protect what is good and expose what is destructive. If a conversation becomes abusive, pausing it is a boundary. If financial irresponsibility continues, changing access to shared money may be a boundary. The goal is reality, not revenge. The marriage chapter also helps with a common confusion. Sacrifice is not the same as boundarylessness. Marriage includes sacrifice. Parenting includes sacrifice. Friendship includes sacrifice. The question is whether the sacrifice is freely chosen in love or extracted by fear, guilt, intimidation, or avoidance. Across family, friendship, and marriage, the book's message is consistent. Closeness does not erase separateness. In fact, the closer the relationship, the more important healthy separateness becomes. Without it, love becomes fusion, caretaking becomes control, and peace becomes silence. One of the book's sharpest ideas is that boundaries are not merely taught by lectures. They're taught by reality. A child learns boundaries when love and consequences live in the same house. An employee learns boundaries when responsibility is clarified instead of endlessly absorbed. An adult learns boundaries with the self when desire is no longer allowed to run the whole kingdom. In this episode, boundaries moves from relationships into training and stewardship. Welcome back. This part covers the chapters on children, work, and the self. The chapter on children begins with the idea that parenting is not just about controlling behavior today. It is about preparing a child to own life tomorrow. A child who never experiences limits may become an adult who expects others to carry discomfort. A child who is controlled harshly may become an adult who obeys externally while lacking internal self-control. The goal is neither permissiveness nor domination. The goal is maturity. Cloud and Townsend argue that children need to learn ownership. Their feelings, choices, mistakes, talents, and responsibilities belong to them in age-appropriate ways. Parents begin with a great deal of control because infants cannot govern themselves. But wise parenting gradually transfers responsibility to the child. The transfer happens through boundaries. A parent says, "This behavior is not acceptable." A parent allows consequences. A parent distinguishes between the child's problem and the parent's problem. If a child refuses homework, the parent may guide, structure, and support, but the child must eventually experience the result of refusing responsibility. The book is especially concerned with rescuing. Rescue feels loving in the moment because it removes pain. But if parents always remove pain created by a child's choices, the child may never develop the muscles of responsibility. Consequences are not cruelty when they are appropriate, proportionate, and connected to reality. They are part of how wisdom is learned. Children also need to see parents with boundaries. If a child can control the house through tantrums, manipulation, disrespect, or endless negotiation, the child is not being loved into maturity. The child is being trained to believe that other people's limits are not real. That lesson becomes expensive later. At the same time, the authors do not argue for cold discipline. Connection matters. Empathy matters. Children need attachment, comfort, and patient instruction. A boundary without love can become harsh control. Love without boundaries can become chaos. Good parenting keeps both together. Then the book moves to work. Work is another place where boundary problems can be praised as dedication. The over-responsible employee gets things done. The whole system may quietly depend on that person absorbing unclear expectations, poor planning, and other people's unfinished tasks. Cloud and Townsend describe workers who cannot say no to unreasonable workloads, cannot clarify job responsibilities, cannot address conflict directly, or cannot let coworkers experience consequences. Some people bring family patterns into the workplace. A boss becomes a parent figure. Disapproval feels unbearable. Saying no feels dangerous. So the employee says yes and calls the exhaustion professionalism. A major work boundary is clarity. What is my job? What is not my job? What deadline is realistic? What priority should come first? What trade-off are we choosing? Many workplace conflicts grow because people avoid these conversations until resentment takes over. Another work boundary is time. If every emergency becomes your emergency, your life will eventually become an emergency. A healthy worker can serve well without pretending to be infinite. That may mean negotiating deadlines, documenting responsibilities, saying what can and cannot be done, or refusing to rescue a pattern that never changes. Work boundaries also require truth with authority. This does not mean reckless rebellion. It means mature communication. If a boss assigns more than can be done, the worker may need to say, "I can complete it by Friday," or "be by Friday," but not both at quality. Which is the priority? That sentence is not laziness. It is reality entering the room. The book also speaks to people who avoid responsibility at work. Boundaries are not a tool for doing less than your share. They clarify ownership both ways. You are not responsible for everything, but you are responsible for your assignments, attitude, honesty, effort, and growth. Then comes the chapter on boundaries with the self. This is one of the most uncomfortable turns in the book because it removes the easy story that the problem is always someone else's demand. Sometimes the boundary violator is inside the house. Cloud and Townsend discuss areas where people may be out of control. Eating, money, time, sexuality, substances, the tongue, anger, or patterns of procrastination and avoidance. In these cases, the issue is not only saying no to others. It is learning to say no to impulses that damage your own life. This is where the property line image becomes even more personal. If my life is my property, I must not only keep destructive things out, I must also govern what happens within. Freedom is not the ability to obey every appetite. Freedom is the ability to choose what serves love, health, truth, and purpose. The authors are careful that self-boundaries usually require support. People rarely gain self-control through shame alone. Shame says, hide this. Growth says, bring it into light with safe people, truthful structure, and repeated practice. This connects back to the law of exposure. Hidden problems remain powerful. Exposed problems can be helped. A person with weak self-boundaries may need external structure for a season. That could mean accountability, financial limits, time blocks, counseling, support groups, or removing access to a repeated temptation. This is not failure. It is wisdom. Offense is useful precisely because the field matters. This episode shows how practical the book's framework is. Boundaries are not only for dramatic confrontations. They shape bedtime, homework, job descriptions, calendars, budgets, appetites, and speech. They turn vague stress into specific ownership. The question becomes, where is responsibility unclear? Is a child carrying too little of what belongs to them? Is a parent carrying too much? Is a worker absorbing what belongs to a boss or coworker? Is an adult blaming others while refusing to govern an inner habit? Boundaries do not answer every detail, but they ask the right ownership question. Flows. Maturity is not control over everyone else. It is stewardship of the life that has actually been placed in your hands. The parenting material is especially important because it shows boundaries as formation, not merely protection. Parents are not just stopping bad behavior. They are helping children develop an internal structure. A child who learns that choices and consequences belong together is being prepared for reality. The author's approach also challenges parents who confuse love with preventing all distress. A child who never has to wait, lose, repair, apologize, practice, or accept limits may feel loved in the moment, but the long-term lesson is dangerous. The child may learn that discomfort is an emergency someone else must solve. At work, the same principle appears in adult clothing. Organizations often reward the person who absorbs dysfunction. That person becomes the unofficial shock absorber. But if the system never has to face its limits, nothing improves. A clear boundary may be the first honest data the workplace receives. Work boundaries are not only for employees. Leaders need them too. A leader with poor boundaries may rescue underperformers, avoid hard conversations, overpromise to clients, or create emergencies through lack of clarity. Good leadership defines responsibility, gives support, and lets consequences teach. The chapter on the self prevents the reader from using boundaries only as an accusation against others. It asks, where am I out of control? Where do my appetites, fears, habits, or impulses cross the line I claim to value? This is uncomfortable because it brings the boundary conversation inside. Self-boundaries often begin with confession, not willpower. A person says, I'm not managing this area well. I need structure. I need help. I need truth. That is not weakness. It is ownership. A hidden lack of self-control grows in darkness, while an exposed one can receive support and strategy. The author's larger point is that freedom and discipline belong together. Without freedom, discipline becomes external control. Without discipline, freedom becomes slavery to impulse. Healthy boundaries train a person to choose what is good even when another part of the self wants the easier thing. This part of the book is practical because it refuses to let boundaries stay in emotional vocabulary. It brings them into calendars, chores, assignments, budgets, conversations, and habits. A boundary that never affects Tuesday afternoon may still be only an idea. The moment a boundary becomes real, someone may test it. That testing can come from other people, but it can also come from inside you. Anger, guilt, fear, grief, loneliness, old loyalty, spiritual anxiety, and plain habit may all rise up and ask the same question. Are you really allowed to change? Boundaries. In this episode, we cover boundaries in God, then the resistance that appears when people begin developing healthy limits. The chapter on God can surprise readers because many people assume boundaries with God must be disrespectful. Cloud and Townsend frame it differently. They argue that real relationship with God includes honesty, freedom, response, and love. God is not interested in robotic compliance. Love that is forced is not love. The authors point out that God gives commands, but also allows human beings to choose. God permits consequences. God says no. God respects human choice enough to let people experience the results of that choice. In their framework, this means boundaries are not foreign to spiritual life. They reflect something about the structure of relationship itself. They also address the person who feels angry, disappointed, or confused with God. Some people think spiritual maturity means pretending those feelings do not exist. Boundaries argues for honesty. A real relationship can bring truth into the open. Prayer can include protest, grief, questions, and desire. The point is not to control God. The point is to relate truthfully. There is also a subtle boundary issue in how people use God language with each other. Someone may say, God told me you should help me. Or, a good Christian would not say no. Or, if you had more faith, you would keep giving. The book's framework pushes back against that kind of spiritual pressure. A person's relationship with God should not become a tool for another person's control. At the same time, boundaries with God do not mean avoiding surrender, service, sacrifice, or obedience. Cloud and Townsend are not promoting a faith built around personal comfort. They're saying that mature faith includes freedom and truth. A resentful yes offered under compulsion is spiritually different from a costly yes offered freely. Then the book turns to resistance. This is where many boundary journeys get difficult. A person reads the principles, feels hope, tries one honest limit, and immediately discovers that the old system liked the old arrangement. External resistance can come as anger. Someone who benefited from your lack of boundaries may accuse you of being selfish, cold, rebellious, ungrateful, or changed in a bad way. Their anger may feel like proof that you did something wrong. The book says anger is information, not a verdict. It may simply mean the old pattern has been disturbed. Resistance can come as guilt messages. A parent sighs. A friend becomes wounded. A spouse says, "After all I have done for you." A church member questions your character. A coworker acts abandoned. The boundary beginner is tempted to rush back and repair the discomfort. But if guilt has been the control system, guilt will often be the first weapon used against change. Resistance can come through consequences. Sometimes a boundary reveals that a relationship was more conditional than you hoped. The person may withdraw. The invitation may disappear. The conflict may intensify. The book does not sugarcoat this. Boundaries can cost something, especially when they interrupt a long-standing imbalance. There is also internal resistance. A person may feel afraid of being alone. They may fear success, because success requires a new identity. They may grieve the fantasy that someone else will finally change first. They may have to face their own envy, passivity, or avoidance. Setting boundaries with others often exposes places where the self also needs growth. Cloud and Townsend emphasize the need for support. Boundary development is not meant to be a solo heroic performance. People need safe relationships, wise counsel, practice, and encouragement. A person who has never said no may need other people nearby while learning to tolerate disapproval. They also distinguish forgiveness from trust. Forgiveness deals with the past debt. Trust deals with present patterns and future access. A person can forgive and still maintain a boundary. Forgiveness does not require pretending that nothing happened, nor does it automatically restore the same level of access. This distinction is crucial because many people collapse forgiveness into immediate reconciliation. The book argues that reconciliation requires more than one person's forgiveness. It requires truth, repentance, changed behavior, and rebuilt trust. A boundary can be the truthful space in which that process is tested. Another kind of resistance is pain itself. When you stop rescuing others, you may have to watch them struggle. When you stop overfunctioning, something may remain unfinished. When you stop managing everyone's feelings, someone may stay disappointed. This can feel unbearable at first, but the authors keep returning to reality. If a person is never allowed to face the results of their choices, growth is interrupted. Boundary growth also requires grieving. You may grieve the family you wished you had. You may grieve years spent pleasing. You may grieve the discovery that some people like your compliance more than your personhood. Grief is not failure. It is part of leaving illusion and entering truth. What keeps this chapter from becoming harsh is the book's insistence that boundaries are for love. The purpose is not to punish everyone who ever asks too much. The purpose is to become capable of genuine relationship. A person who can say no without hatred can also say yes without resentment. The spiritual thread of this episode is freedom. Cloud and Townsend believe love must be freely chosen. That means people must be allowed to choose badly, experience consequences, tell the truth, and change over time. Forced goodness may preserve appearances, but it cannot produce mature love. So when resistance arrives, the boundary question is not only, how do I make the other person stop reacting? The better question is, what belongs to me right now? My clarity belongs to me. My tone belongs to me. My follow-through belongs to me. My need for support belongs to me. The other person's response belongs to them. Close. Resistance does not always mean the boundary is wrong. Sometimes it means the boundary has finally become visible. The God chapter also addresses a hidden fear. If I have boundaries, will I become less available to God? Cloud and Townsend answer by separating surrender from people-pleasing. Surrender to God is not the same as surrender to every demand made in God's name. Spiritual maturity requires discernment. This matters because religious communities can be beautiful places of service, but they can also become places where guilt language hides unhealthy pressure. A need is announced. A person feels responsible, and no one asks whether the yes is free, wise, or sustainable. The book invites faith communities to honor both service and limits. Resistance is predictable because boundaries change the economy of a relationship. If someone has been receiving unlimited emotional labor, money, time, rescue, or compliance, a new limit feels like loss. They may call the limit selfish because, from their perspective, it removes a benefit. That does not settle the moral question. The authors also show that anger is not always the enemy. For someone who has been compliant for years, anger may be the first signal that the self still exists. But anger must mature. It can wake a person up, but it cannot guide the whole journey. Eventually, the person must move from reactive anger to proactive choice. Guilt is another form of resistance. Some guilt is healthy because it tells us when we have done wrong. But much guilt is learned control. It appears when we have merely disappointed someone, changed a pattern, or stopped carrying a load that was never ours. Boundary growth requires learning the difference. Fear of loneliness may be the deepest resistance. If I set a boundary, will anyone stay? The book does not offer fake guarantees. Instead, it points toward building a support system of people who can handle truth. Boundary growth often requires new community because the old system may not be able to support the new self. Forgiveness and trust are crucial here. A person may forgive a harm and still say, Access will be different until trust is rebuilt. That is not bitterness. It is wisdom. Trust is built by trustworthy behavior over time, not by pressure, apology alone, or the wounded person's desire to make the tension disappear. The resistance chapters are realistic because they admit that truth can create short-term disruption. But the alternative is not peace. The alternative is the old pain continuing under a nicer name. Boundaries may disturb false peace, so real peace has a chance. The goal of boundaries is not to win more arguments. It is to become the kind of person who can love without disappearing. That is why the book ends by asking how success can be measured. Boundary growth is not only a dramatic conversation, a brave no, or a cleaned-up calendar. It is a change in the structure of a life. Welcome to the final episode of this summary of boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. In this part, we cover how the book measures success and how it imagines a day in a life with healthier boundaries. The first sign of growth is often resentment becoming information instead of a secret lifestyle. In a boundaryless life, resentment builds quietly. A person keeps saying yes, keeps smiling, keeps serving, and keeps collecting emotional debt. With growth, resentment becomes a signal. Something may be unclear, overextended, dishonest, or wrongly owned. The goal is not to worship resentment. Resentment can be immature. It can exaggerate. It can blame. But it can also tell you that a property line has been crossed or never marked. Mature people learn to listen to the signal without letting it drive the car. Another sign of success is the ability to say no with less panic. At first, no may feel like violence. Later, it becomes a truthful word. It can be spoken calmly. It can be spoken kindly. It can be spoken without a courtroom speech. This is one of the marks of freedom. You no longer need to justify every limit until the other person approves. A related sign is the ability to hear no from others. This is where boundary growth becomes honest. Many people love boundaries when they protect their own time, but hate them when someone else has a limit. The book insists that mature boundaries are mutual. If my no matters, your no matters too. Success also looks like clearer choices. A boundaryless person often experiences life as something that happens to them. Every demand becomes inevitable. Every disappointment becomes an emergency. With boundaries, the person begins to see options. I can help this much. I can decline. I can negotiate. I can ask for time. I can let the consequence stand. I can choose a costly yes because it aligns with love, not because fear owns me. Another sign is improved responsibility. Boundaries do not make people less responsible. They make responsibility more accurate. You stop carrying what belongs to others, and you become more faithful with what belongs to you. That may mean better work, clearer parenting, more honest friendship, healthier marriage, wiser money choices, and more direct communication. The book also expects a change in motivation. A person may begin with fear. They may set boundaries because they are desperate. Over time, the motivation matures. Boundaries become less about escape and more about love, stewardship, truth, and freedom. There's also a change in relationships. Some relationships become healthier because truth finally has room. Some become more distant because the old arrangement depended on imbalance. Some end. That is painful, but the book does not measure success by keeping every relationship in its old form. It measures success by whether love and truth are becoming more real. Cloud and Townsend's final picture returns to daily life. The contrast with Sherry's opening day matters. At the beginning, she was pulled by every demand, guided by guilt, late everywhere, angry underneath, and spiritually confused by her own exhaustion. A life with boundaries does not mean every problem disappears. It means the day is no longer governed by invisible ownership errors. Imagine the same kind of day with healthier boundaries. A mother can care for her children while letting them face appropriate consequences. She can speak directly with her spouse rather than silently collecting resentment. She can respond to her own mother with compassion and limits. She can work diligently without pretending that poor planning by others erases her humanity. This healthier day is not selfish. It is more truthful. The person has not stopped loving. She has stopped confusing love with unlimited availability. The book's final movement also reminds us that boundaries take time. People do not become mature through one sentence. They practice. They fail. They overcorrect. They feel guilt and survive it. They repair when they speak harshly. They learn which relationships can tolerate truth. They build support. They try again. This is why the book's message is both simple and demanding. Simple, because the central question is always ownership. What belongs to me? What belongs to you? What does love require from me? And what am I trying to control that I cannot control? Demanding, because those questions reach into family, faith, work, marriage, parenting, friendship, habits, money, and the private motives of the heart. One of the most useful takeaways is that boundaries protect the yes. A person who cannot say no eventually loses the ability to give a clean yes. Every yes becomes suspicious. Is this love or fear? Is this generosity or guilt? Is this service or a bargain for approval? Boundaries cleanse the yes by making no possible. Another takeaway is that consequences are not the enemy of compassion. Consequences can be painful, but they're often the bridge between choice and growth. When we rescue people from every consequence, we may feel loving while blocking the very lesson reality is trying to teach. A third takeaway is that spiritual language should never be used to erase personhood. The author's Christian frame does not make them allergic to limits. They argue that freedom, truth, responsibility, and love belong together. A coerced soul may behave, but it cannot mature in love. A fourth takeaway is that boundaries begin with support. If you have lived without limits for years, do not be surprised if your first attempts feel clumsy. Find safe people. Practice with small truths. Expect resistance. Keep your tone clean. Let your no be clear enough to be understood and kind enough to reflect your values. And finally, remember that boundaries are not a technique for making everyone respect you. Some people may not. Boundaries are a way to live honestly before God, yourself, and others. They do not guarantee a painless life. They make a truthful life possible. Thank you for listening to this full summary of boundaries. If this series helped, the most practical next step is not to make a dramatic speech. Start smaller. Notice one place where resentment is telling you a limit is unclear. Ask what actually belongs to you. Then speak or act with truth, kindness, and follow through. Final close. A life with boundaries is not a life without love. It is a life where love finally has a home, a gate, and a person standing there awake. Measuring success also means noticing what no longer controls you. Maybe anger no longer controls you because you can speak before resentment explodes. Maybe guilt no longer controls you because you can distinguish disappointment from wrongdoing. Maybe fear no longer controls you because you have survived someone's disapproval and remained standing. Another sign is the ability to repair. Boundary growth does not mean you always speak perfectly. You may sound too sharp. You may withdraw too far. You may make a limit unclear. Mature people repair without surrendering the boundary itself. They can say, I was harsh in my tone, and the limit still stands. The final picture of daily life is powerful because it keeps the book grounded. The goal is not a theory called boundaries. The goal is a different morning, a different phone call, a different workday, a different conversation with a child, a different response to guilt, a different relationship with your own desires. The book also implies that boundaries make generosity more beautiful. When a person can truly say no, Their yes becomes more trustworthy. Others do not have to wonder whether the gift is secretly building resentment. The giver is present because they chose to be present. In the end, boundaries is about maturity. Mature people are connected but not fused, compassionate but not controlled, honest but not cruel, responsible but not over-responsible, free but not selfish. The whole book is an argument that love and limits are not enemies. They are partners. For a viewer applying this summary, the safest first step is often observation. Notice where you feel chronic resentment. Notice where you avoid asking for help. Notice where you push past another person's no. Notice where you call control love. Notice where you expect someone else to own what belongs to you. Observation turns vague pain into a map. Then choose one small act of truthful ownership, not a dramatic life overhaul. One clear no, one direct conversation, one consequence allowed to stand, one request for help, one calendar limit, one budget boundary, one apology for crossing someone else's line. Boundary growth becomes real through repeated practice.